How do we handle situations where time pressures and deadlines push stakeholders to focus on specific solutions that must be delivered quickly, especially when there isn't time to explore broader frameworks, is what the rest says because it got cut off. So time pressures obviously is an element that's difficult. For starters, most time deadlines are arbitrary. Like we made them up. Like you can move them. I also get that creating some type of stake in the ground and creating some type of sense of urgency can be also useful and valuable as well. So I think that's a whole nother thing about challenging. Why do we need the deadlines? Is it arbitrary? Is it self-imposed? Can we create some more flexibility? Where I would and where I have in the past normally indexed in these situations is what I want to do is I want to try and help them see the risk that we are carrying in the fact that we haven't tested these things and like we have all these assumptions. So if you think about, if I go back to Sharon actually, so if you think about like this pitch is a perfect one. There's a whole bunch of assumptions. So I'm trying to get them to see, and it was actually kind of the conversation I was having with them, trying to get them to see like we have a lot of risk here. There's a lot of assumptions. Now we could blindly plow ahead and deliver it, and we'll hit that timeline. But what's more important? Is it time to market or time to money, right? So is getting these things right, like increasing our conversion and stuff like that, is that more important than the deadline, or is the deadline kind of more important? And you kind of can facilitate this conversation about like, okay, what is more important? Because I'm trying to help them see that risk. Now, you can help to minimize that risk. So I did a talk. It was a part of Product Circle Chat, which is a meetup. The talk is up on YouTube anyway. So if you go to YouTube, Product Pathways, you can find it. It's one of the things I talk about. So the talk is all about influencing and how to get stakeholders to buy into product discovery is the title of the talk basically. And one of the things I talk about in there is actually about loss aversion. So one of the things you do need to be mindful about all of them is like, okay, if that date, if that is really important to them, they're going to have a lot of loss aversion and stress about missing that date. So one of the things you'll need to do as part of that is also minimize that loss aversion. So one of the things that I talk about in that talk is, can we time box? So if we're going to explore alternative solutions, explore the problem space, that type of stuff, how do we make it really, really small for them? And I talk about time boxing, and what I would be aiming to do would be to create a small enough time box that they're comfortable with. This is where I personally have a hypothesis as to why design sprints has been so prolific and popular, because design sprints only ask you to do 1 week, right? So if there's a date in the future that's like 3 months away, and I'm asking for 1 week to just explore alternative things, that's a easier thing to say yes to than me asking for 14 weeks, because that's longer than 3 months, or 4 weeks even. Does that make sense? Because then you're like, well, we're going to get a month in and we're only going to have 2 months to do something. So that's some of the things I'd be thinking about as well, is like, how can I just make this really, really small? And it's not going to be perfect. So also recognizing that whatever we come out with is going to be not great. It's not like the most rigorous research in the world, but at least we've tried to tick off some of the top assumptions and at least pivot it a little bit into the direction, into a better direction. How do you handle a situation where the stakeholders communicate that the solution is a leadership ask/expectation, and then escalate to senior leaders to get that solution that they want? So I'm assuming this is like that situation where it's like, oh, you need to do this because the CEO said it. And maybe the CEO never said it, but then they escalate it and it's like, hey, they're not playing ball, and, to get the senior person to endorse it, and then you have to do it. I'm assuming correct me if I'm misreading the situation anew, but so it's super difficult, right? Because this one is another one that gets a little bit broader, and it gets into like the company culture. And if the company culture is very much like a do what you're told culture, especially one that's like do what insert senior person or rank above X says, then those things are going to be really, really hard to break, because that's like a cultural thing. And if you, again, this goes back to my little picture at the start about being kicked out the window, because it's really easy in those environments to just get yourself fired or like a career limited move, because they're like, well, you're not doing what everybody else does. We'll just replace you with someone who's a yes person. This isn't a perfect thing, but where I generally index on these ones is, again, those principles about like, don't disagree. So I'd be like, yes, cool idea. Can you help me understand blah? Can you help me understand this? Or again, working forwards works great here as well. A senior executive said that we should do that. Cool. If we did do this, what does that mean? And if we need to get that senior person, if we can, I should say, obviously you need to, but if we can get that person in the room as well as part of that conversation, even better. Now, you're right in saying that there could be environments where you're trying to have those conversations. They're like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it aligns to our goal or not. The CEO said that we need to do it, or they're not even entertaining that conversation. In those situations, you're going to be in that position where there's not much you can do. You can try to influence. You can maybe try and find some allies that are on like a similar rank that can like kind of support you. That's always a really good influencing technique as well. Find like those coalition of friends that can hopefully support you and give you some air cover to hopefully open the conversation up. But unless you have some of those things, it's just going to be really hard. This is where I get to that last one that I had, which is, okay, let's deliver their solution. Now, I'm going to do it in one of two ways. I'm either going to deliver it with the hope that I'm going to measure it and be able to play it back and be able to open up a conversation about, okay, we did do what the exec wanted, but no one's using it and it's costing us this amount of money. Like, should we do something here? Again, like, not trying to attack or anything, like just let the data speak for itself. Like, what should we do? It's costing us money and no one's using it. Like, should we do something? And maybe they say no. Okay, move on. There is definitely, and the second thing that I might be doing it is more from the trust element, right? Like, okay, I want to keep my job here. So this is like it depends on how you think, right? Some people might be like, I don't care. I'm going to challenge it. I'm going to push. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to continue to say no. I'm going to fight it. I've been there and I've lost that battle. And you just end up doing it anyways. So like for me, a lot of it, what I think about is like, what is in my control and what is in my realm of influence. So I'll sketch this. When I say this, it's a very clear mental model to me, but for some of you, it might not be. There's this concept of like spheres of influence, right? So in the center, very bad circles, is the stuff that's in your control. This is your influence. And then this is your area of concern. Concern is stuff that I'm concerned about, I worry about, but like I can't control. So like, and I can't influence either. This might be the CEO, and the CEO says do X. Okay, that's my area of concern because, and this is why I would try and do measures, and I'll try and work out whether it's going to be successful or not. But it's my area of concern. I can't change it. These things I have control over, and then I might have influence about trying to get them to think broader about like, okay, is this the right idea? I might use that data to try and influence them, but ultimately they're outside of my sphere of influence and control. So do I want to put all my energy, because part of this is energy management too, do I want to put all my energy into here, or do I just deliver X and I find other things that I can influence, I can control, and for those things, I definitely make sure that they have a clear problem and they're going to hit the mark and they're going to be successful. And then, by the way, you can use that success to then influence people to say, well, these things were super successful. And that's because I went through this process and it had a clear problem. And that's why it's so successful. And maybe they get interested into wanting to do that more broadly. But that's kind of some of the things that go through my head. I know not always the best answer, because here's the reality of influencing too. The reality of influencing is that you can't make people do something they don't want to do. You can influence them to hopefully see your perspective or change their perspective or be a little bit more open, but you can't change them. So again, sphere of influence versus control. Cool. I'm going to touch Paru's question and we'll see. Maybe it might be the last question based on the time box. What happens when in a large organization, there are silos and fractured strategies? How do you frame the problem value with stakeholders? Great question. This happens all the time, especially in larger organizations. Things get super siloed, functional silos, but sometimes not even functional silos. Like it happens when we start to divide the company up by product groups, right? We might start to divide by product segments and stuff. And then we start to have these silos when sometimes there's stuff that can go across those segments. We end up with fractured strategies, that type of stuff. Obviously, moving up that pyramid becomes a little bit difficult when there's fractures. However, it can be super powerful because it can help you identify points of like where do we disagree? Where does it break down? And if you get to like a strategy level and it starts to break down because, okay, this doesn't align to this strategy, but aligns to that strategy. Well, cool. We've identified the root problem that we have. Hopefully that can then lead me to go, let's get those leaders together and let's have a talk about this because I have a solution that doesn't align here, but aligns there. Then, so you're asking me to do it. Should we do it? Should we not? How do we balance this against everything else? So there's a lot of that going on. Now, if you don't have those things, how do you frame the problem and value? A lot of what I do is I just frame it in isolation of, right? So maybe I'll just share my screen really quickly to visualize this. I'm a visual person too, so it helps me with explaining it. So again, go back to this. Where's my pen? Okay, cool. So what do we have? Let's say we don't have strategy, and maybe we have a vision, but it's irrelevant if we don't have strategy. So none of this stuff exists. So above this line doesn't exist. Okay, we have an OKR. I would then frame value and the problem in relation to that OKR. So OKR is here. Your solution is here. Let's do a path that way. This is where we start to ask those questions, whether we use any of these techniques, simply asking questions, powerful questions, or trying to work forwards, not backwards. I'm trying to uncover, okay, what does this mean for our customers? What does this mean for our business? And maybe that needs to break down into different departments or different areas that have different strategies. And then how does those things link to this OKR? So if the OKR is revenue or something, okay, like how does this all kind of fit together? So now, if you don't have that, so let's say we don't have OKRs, then let's just do it in isolation on itself, which is exactly what we are doing here in these spaces, right? So not that one actually had it, but this one's a good example of that. This is completely in isolation. This is like someone said we need to move everything to the cloud. There isn't really a strategy or anything higher. We don't have an OKR that we're driving towards. So let's just say, well, what does this mean for our customers, for our business, from an outcome perspective? What problems are we solving? So then value gets derived as we want to solve these problems. And if we disagree that these problems are the most important problems to solve right now, cool. What other problems exist that are more important? Let's talk about them. So then you can kind of prioritize that. You could do it in isolation while you try and tackle the fractured thing. Now, if you have multiple stakeholders competing with different, like this might be super valuable, maybe like half of it, like these ones are super valuable to one stakeholder, these are super valuable to another. You might need to get them to align on a common thing to align them. So what I have done in that situation is, can I get them to agree on, okay, there's these 4 problems. What is the ultimate outcome that's really important to us? If we can get you two to agree on that one, then we can anchor around that and then we can kind of work from there. That's like, that's in the absence of a strategy. And then obviously in the absence of trying to solve those problems. Don't know how helpful that is, but hopefully that is helpful. We can definitely have a deeper conversation about that too. Cool. If you enjoyed this video, then you're going to love the first half of this conversation where I went through 6 different tactics that I use for when stakeholders come with solutions, not problems. You'll be able to find that video up here. And if you've already watched that webinar, then you can find a YouTube recommended video for you down here, which I know is going to be valuable because the algorithm's great, right? Right?